So a few people may join as we go along, which always happens, but that's absolutely fine. This information is going to be available online, so I will send a link to everyone, and you can keep it and watch it again if you want to. So let's make a start with the presentation. I will have a section for any questions at the end, and if anybody has got the chat able to work, then you can also leave a question there, but don't worry if it's not working for you. So let's move on to the next slide. She says, there we are. So this is what we're going to be covering in the webinar. Who I am, safety and what you can't use and when, foraging safely, and then the 5 herbs that I'm going to be, or 5 weeds that I'm going to be covering today are dandelion, nettle, daisy, herb robert and plantain. So let's make a start. Okay, so who am I? My name is Laura Carpenter, which many of you will probably already know. I'm a medical herbalist and I live and practice in Somerset in the UK. I trained at the University of East London in herbal medicine, and I have my own clinic, and I run online courses and a mentorship program. So on to safety. The first thing, and I put this in all of my talks and things, people feel that herbs are natural and therefore safe. Surely that must be the case. Sadly, it's not the case, because within that world of plants, you've got one end of the scale is a carrot and the other end of the scale is deadly nightshade. So, and there are many, many herbs in between those two elements, but sadly, no, that is a very common myth. Just because something is natural means that it's safe. And what I put on everything as well is do not take any herbs internally if you are pregnant or taking any forms of medication unless under the guidance of a medical herbalist. Okay, so as we're talking about weeds, I've got my foraging, for foraging safely. First of all, you need to ensure that you can correctly identify the plant. With a lot of these things, especially with the weeds that we're going to talk about today, I mean, I think most people would be able to correctly identify it without too many problems, but it is obviously very important to make sure that you can correctly identify the plant that you're going to be working with, and if you can't, don't use it. Do you have permission to forage where you're going to be gathering your plants? Also, has the area been sprayed or contaminated with any chemicals? This is particularly pertinent for people who may be using weeds from allotments, or just collecting them from hedgerows, roadsides, etc. It is important to know what has actually come onto them from a spray, and also don't forget it's contaminated from the soil as well. So you've got the two. Just because a plant isn't near somewhere that you think might have sprayed, it doesn't mean that that soil itself isn't actually contaminated. So do be wary of that. If you're picking in your own garden, then the weeds from your own garden, then that's not a problem. Ensure that you leave enough for future growth, even for weeds. They all have uses for insect life and animal life, as well as great that we're going to use them as medicines as well. But yes, we do want to leave them for other uses. And I've put a link in here to the foraging code, and it goes into a lot more detail of those points, and it's got links to the Foraging Act and all the legal stuff that you need to know if you are going to be attempting some foraging. Okay, just check it didn't skip. Oh. So the first plant that I'm going to be talking about is dandelion. I think probably the majority of people can identify a dandelion, but if you're not sure, then do look it up. So dandelions are native to the UK and they're not endangered in any way. They're very prolific weeds, and you'll see them growing on any disturbed ground, and they'll just pop up everywhere. So it's actually the flowers, leaves, and the roots that are all used medicinally with dandelion. So it's not only is it prolific because it grows everywhere, but also the fact that you can use pretty much every part of it as well. So traditionally it was used to cleanse the liver. Now you'll see this in a lot of old herb books, liver cleansing, and it basically means liver detoxification, which is what we would really use the word, which is more of a medical term now. And the leaves are diuretic and can reduce swelling and regulate blood pressure. And the roots cleanse the liver and regulate blood sugar. So you've got slightly different actions depending on the part of the dandelion that you're using. So they're not the same. It's not take every part of it and it does the same thing. So and that's because in each part of the dandelion there are different biochemicals, so they're going to be having different effects depending on which bit that you're using. Just come on to that. Before I just go on to the uses, so it's important to note with dandelion, I think all of the herbs that I'm talking about in the webinar this evening, is that none of them have any interactions with any medications. As I said before, I wouldn't recommend them in pregnancy, but it's absolutely, these majority of these are actually edible, and usually things that are on the scale of, and they're edible, tend not to interact with medications. But yes, dandelion does not interact with any medication, so it's absolutely fine for anybody to have as a medicine. Right, ways to use dandelion. So I've got a couple of different ways. Dandelion coffee, and this is made from the root, and the root is basically dry roasted. And you can do this if you've got your own dandelions and you want to give it a go. Just pull them out. So you're going to be harvesting them in the autumn. Really, with dandelions, sort of end of September onwards is fine. And although, because they do carry on growing, especially if we don't have particularly cold spells, really you could harvest the root really at any time. But generally, as a rule of thumb, it would be end of September onwards. Harvest the root, and in dandelion you get a big tap root, and you need to give it a good scrub, and then chop it up and roast it in the oven. You can be quite liberal with it, especially if this is going to be used as a coffee. You actually want a bit more, so you're going to go beyond the point of losing some of its medicinal properties through the roasting, but that's fine because you're actually going to be using it more of a coffee substitute, rather than, you will still get some of its medicinal properties in this way. And you do need to be a bit careful, because when you take it, and if you take it too much, because it's bitter, it can stimulate the digestive system. So yeah, just be a bit wary of that, and take it in small amounts if you're building up to using dandelion. Dandelion flowers, they can be eaten in salads, and they can also be made into marmalades, and there are lots and lots of recipes out there that you can look at. I have a feeling that I tend to recommend Robin Harford, and his website is eatweeds.co.uk. and he's got, just pop that in and it'll come out. If you just, or just search for dandelion flower marmalade, you'll get it to come out. So yes, the flowers can be eaten and made into other things. And you can add young dandelion leaves to salads to help cleanse the liver. So those are just some different ways. Obviously, you can make it into a tincture. You can make it into a tea. It extracts perfectly well in things like vinegar, glycerin to some extent. The leaf is better if you're going to be doing it in glycerin. Vinegar is fine for any part of it. And if you're going to be using alcohol, you can use any part of it to make a tincture. Okay. Actually, I'm not going too fast. But so the next one is nettle. Again, I think most people can probably identify a nettle. Very, very common. Is native to the UK, although you do get different versions of nettle throughout the world, really. It's not endangered in any way. It grows prolifically. And again, it's a plant where we use all the different parts of it. So we use this medicinally, the seeds, leaves, and the roots, all used medicinally. So traditionally used as a diuretic and a urinary antiseptic for many bladder conditions. And really it's still used in that way by herbalists today as well. There's no reason why you can't use it as a diuretic and a urinary antiseptic. It's just that we tend to use other herbs for that now, but there's no reason why you can't. And the leaves are anti-inflammatory and antihistamine, and a traditional blood cleanser. It's another one of those words that you'll see in a lot of the old herbal books. A blood cleanser is something that sort of removes, or what would have been said, removes toxins from the body. We don't tend to use that word anymore, but if people would have been seen that their blood was too thick or unclean, so this is going back quite a few hundred years, and this would be seen as shifting blood within the body and fluids within the body. So that's why it's often called a blood cleanser. And that if you think about it, that's exactly what it does, because it is a diuretic, it's a urinary antiseptic. It does move fluids around the body, and it does strengthen the blood, because we know it's very high in minerals and iron in particular. So they knew what they were doing, really. Because that is exactly what it does, is it does move blood and it does help replenish minerals and iron. So ways to use nettle. Nettle seeds can be sprinkled on porridge or muesli to boost the immune system and give a boost of energy. They are adaptogenic. So people tend to know adaptogens such as ginseng. Now, nettle seed is one of our native versions of that, and ashwagandha is very, very popular, and which is an Indian herb. But our native ones, nettle seed is one of those. So you don't have to go thousands of miles to be able to use a plant that has those properties. We have one growing in your back garden. So the nettle seeds, they're a bit green at the moment. So depending on where you are and how much sun is out, you want them, as they go from green to the beginnings of brown, that is the ideal time to harvest them. You don't want them to be crumbly. They will have gone over if they're crumbly. So they should feel a bit well formed and a little bit almost greasy in your hand. That is the perfect time to harvest your nettle seeds. Now, the problem with nettle seeds is that there's a very small window for you to harvest them. So it's not like you can just go out and think, oh, I'm going to get some nettle seeds today and put it on my porridge. So yes, you can do that during the time when you can harvest them. However, the difficulty is they do not preserve very well at all. So you can make medicines with them, yes, but if you wanted to actually dry them and then use them in that form, such as sprinkled on porridge or muesli, they go really horrible and moldy within about a week. So it's not the ideal thing, and people are like, oh, you can freeze them and you can do all these things. To be honest, it just does not work. It's one of those things that it just does not preserve in that way very well. However, there's no reason why you couldn't put your nettle seed into alcohol and make it into a tincture, or you couldn't add them into an infused oil, which I'll come on to on the next point, and then use them, and they'll be preserved within your whatever medium that you're using, whether that be vinegar, oil, alcohol. So there's no reason that works perfectly well. It's just on their own and having them dried, it tends not to work. So this is a recipe that it's actually a Roman recipe, and it's sort of come back into popularity in the last 10 years or so with herbalists. And that's a combination of nettle seed and rosemary infused oil. So the two, you don't have to infuse them at the same time or anything like that. You can quite easily just make a nettle seed infused oil and then make a rosemary infused oil and then mix it together. That's fine. They don't have to be. But if you do happen to have them both in the garden at the same time and you want to save on washing up, you can do it in the same jar. That's fine. So you can make them into an infused oil, and if you when you get the presentation, there is a link to how to make an infused oil in my videos, so you can just click on that if you are new to making infused oils and you want to give that a go. So the great thing is with this infused oil is that it's used for aching joints, and it's a natural anti-inflammatory. Really helpful, and quite specific to arthritis in the hands. So if you know anybody who has problems with stiffness in the hands, this is a really great one for that. Not to say that it doesn't work in other parts of the body, because it does. It's just, it seems to be really effective in the hands. And that probably is due to the rosemary infused oil, because rosemary increases the dilation of blood vessels, and I think that's especially small blood vessels, which is what you have in your hands. So it goes in there and gives them a good opening up. Very technical term. So nettle tea, moving on from the infused oils. So using the leaf, it's too late now really, but the leaves have gone over. Once the nettle has gone into flower and then seed, do not use the leaves. They no longer contain the medicinal properties that we would want. And in fact, they can cause the opposite effects if you take them after this point, after they're starting to die. So it's the new leaves for your nettle tea, and you can obviously have that dried as a tea bag. I mean, you can get nettle tea in Tesco's. It's anywhere, any supermarket now has nettle tea in a tea bag. It's not something that is difficult to get hold of. But if you want to do it and you want to go out and you want to gather your nettles, you want to dry it and you want to do it yourself, it's going to need to be in the spring, really, ideally. Certainly before it flowers, depending on where you are. I mean, if you're in Scotland and it's not flowered yet, then you're okay. But yes, pre-flowering the leaves. And you can take it to prevent hay fever symptoms, and you can take it before hay fever season. So yeah, traditionally, it's probably not traditionally, but what tends to be recommended is that you take it a month before your particular hay fever season. So if you know that you get a terrible runny nose during June, then you need to be taking your nettle during May. Yeah, it's very effective, and this is something that they've done in recent clinical trials as well. They actually used a capsule, which I think is not as effective. It's actually better if you take it as a tea. But if you're somebody who doesn't like the taste of the tea, you could take it as a tincture, or you could take it as a capsule. But as I said, I feel that it's not as it's basically not as bioactive, so it's not as well absorbed by the body if it's in a capsule form. Right. Time are we on? Good. Oh. And traditionally they were used for they were actually traditionally used for piles, and this tended to be the root more so than the aerial parts, the flower and the leaves. But that tends to be what people, if you look it up in books, that's what you're going to, in older books, that's what you'll find. We don't tend to use it so much, we don't tend to use it in that way now. But daisy, and I mean the common daisy, so Bellis perennis, the one that, you know, is in the lawn and that kind of daisy, it's really, really useful for bruising. I mean, it's fantastic for bruising and reducing scarring. And it's our equivalent of arnica, because arnica is really difficult to grow, and it's actually endangered in the wild. It grows at quite high altitudes, and those environments are really being destroyed, and because everything is warming up, it's really difficult now either to grow it or to wild harvest it, which you shouldn't do anyway, but there are obviously people out there doing that. So arnica is a no-no now for me, and this is our equivalent of arnica. It is, I think, 10 times more effective. There you are. I'm going to put that out there. You can quote me on that. It really, really is great for bruising and so basically as an anti-inflammatory. And it's used externally, so very similar in the way that arnica is used in either as an infused oil, an ointment, or a cream. Then for first aid things, and just for any kind of bruising really, and as an anti-inflammatory. So you can use daisy. They infuse really, really well in oil. You'll see the oil will go bright green, because that's always the sign of a really good extraction. If you've started off with something like quite a light sunflower oil, and by the end of a month in your infused oil, it's turned bright green. And daisy will do that. You can use the whole part of the daisy. So I say the whole part, it's actually the aerial part. So it's the leaves, the stem, and the flower. When it's in flower, that's when you want to gather it. That's when it's got its maximum potency, is when it's in flower, and you literally just pick the whole thing up. You don't even need to chop it up very finely. Pop it in some oil, leave it for a month, strain it, and then either add beeswax or a plant wax. And there you go. You've got an ointment for your first aid kit that will last at least 2 years, really, if it's been made well. Definitely. You don't need to have any preservatives or anything in there. So that's daisy, not internally. So it's not one to have internally. It can actually cause gastric. So it basically would cause a very irritated and upset stomach if you were to drink it or eat it. So you would only do it once, really. It's not poisonous, but it is extremely irritating to the digestive tract. So it is not one to take internally, but externally, fantastic for the bruising and scarring. Great. Right, so Hib Roberts I'm sorry that it's lost my picture. I don't know what on earth has happened to this. But herb Robert, for people who don't know, it's going to come up on there. Basically, it's a geranium. It's a native geranium. It's got a red stem and a little pink flower. And I've got videos on how to identify it on YouTube, so feel free to take a look at that. So herb Robert is native to the UK. It is prolific. It is not endangered in any way. It is safe. It does not have any interactions with any medications, so it's fine for anybody. It is, it's the whole part of the plant above ground. So that's what's called aerial parts. You'll see that written. And it means everything growing above ground. So it's your stem and the flower. And it's when it's in flower is when you gather it. So now it's out now. And again, you can chop it up and just pop it in some alcohol if you're going to be making it into a tincture. So you can use it, I've put here on the, a way to use it is as a base of a natural insect repellent. Now this is because it has natural essential oils within it, which are insect repelling. It's an effective insect repellent, which is why some people don't like the smell of it. It doesn't actually carry through that smell into the tincture, so you're fine. If you don't like the smell of it, it's fine when it's tinctured. So you can use it as a base for an insect repellent. I've got videos on how to make insect repellents if you want to have a look at that and the recipes for making your own. So you can also infuse it in oil, like I talked about with the daisy. And actually you can combine the two. There's no reason why you couldn't. And so you can make it into an infused oil, and then you can either make it into a cream or an ointment, and it has antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties. So it's a nice one for the first aid kit. And you can also, so when I talked about the nettle seed giving energy, this is another one of our native herbs that is an adaptogen. So boosts energy and reduces stress. Herb Robert is one of those. And you can just try that as a tea if you want to give that a go. If you've got some in the garden and you fancy trying some. The amounts, if you're picking it fresh, I'm sort of going to estimate, I would say you're going to need a good handful per cup, because it actually, once you chop it down and put it in a cup of water, it goes to not a lot. So I would say you're going to need about a handful but it's maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it would be the equivalent of once it was chopped, I would say 2 tablespoons of the fresh plants in per cup of hot water. That would be my equivalent. If it's dried, it would be about 2 teaspoons per day would be fine for that. So my next one is plantain. So 2 kinds of plantain. There's your lancet leaf plantain, which is this one in the picture, for people who can see the picture. And it basically has a long stem with what I always think looks like a mouse on the end, but it has these leaves with very, very prominent veins, and rib. So they tend to be called ribs or veins, and so that's one of its key identifying features. You've got this type, which is sometimes called a lancet leaf plantain, and then you have a broadleaf plantain, which are the ones which tend to grow in lawns and they will sometimes just have like two waxy leaves with quite prominent veins, and they're related. They're closely related. And so closely related that you can use them interchangeably. So if you happen to have a little bit of one and lots of the other, it's fine to mix them together. Or you might have one and not the other. That's absolutely fine. Now, plantain is actually edible. You could eat the seeds. You can eat the young leaves as well. Yeah, not the nicest thing to eat really, but technically you can. And it's the leaves that are used medicinally. So it's traditionally used as a lung and kidney tonic. And externally it has anesthetic and wound healing properties, which is great. Very good for the first aid kit. And it's also useful for colds and flu and hay fever. And that's because when you take it, it has a drying action on what are called mucous membranes. So things, if you have a runny nose, if you have runny eyes, anything like that, it actually has a very drying action for those. So why it's used in those cases. Right. So if you are out, either in your garden, out for a walk, whatever it might be, and you see some leaves and you happen to have a runny nose, you can try this and chew a leaf to stop a runny nose. I mean, it happens within seconds of you actually chewing the leaf and the constituents in your mouth being released by your saliva, because that those biochemicals via saliva and the bloodstream will basically have an immediate effect. It basically signals for your nose to stop producing liquid. So yes, it's a nice one to try. It's really, really good if you're a dog walker or you're a walker and you go out from a warm house outside on a cold day, or the other way around, and you get that sudden just that your nose runs because of that change, and yeah, it's a really good one for that. So they are brilliant on this is the leaf, and you can just rub that straight on bites and stings if you're out and about. It's actually far more effective than a dock leaf for a nettle sting, and they do grow together, so there's no reason why you can't use it. You can infuse the leaves in oil, and then add beeswax or plant wax to make an ointment, and this is great for grazes, insect bites and stings. Again, it's another great one for the first aid kit. But yeah, lots of uses for plantain. I've just got some references there. Anybody wants those? So a couple of books that I recommend for people who are just sort of getting into using plants in this way is The Handmade Apothecary, which is by Kim Walker and Vicky Chown. They're both medical herbalists. They're based in London. And if you look them up on online, you'll see them as The Handmade Apothecary. They're very active online, and you can go on their herb books, and they actually qualified a few years before me, but yes, so I do know of them, and they're really, really great, and their book is lovely. It's not expensive, and it's got really great pictures and information about the herbs and foraging, and pretty much I think all the herbs that I've talked about are in their book. So it's a really great one to start with, and for people who maybe are thinking they want to go a little bit further, so the next one on will be the Encyclopedia of Herbal Medicine by Andrew Chevalier. So his, I think it's I'm not sure if it's 2016 or 2017, but it's relatively new. And it's got some really good information in there, lots of recipes and health stuff. But yeah, so depending on what level people may be at, that's one to take a look at. So resources of mine, the links throughout the presentation will go to my YouTube channel. So it's got all the videos on how to make an infused oil and how to make a tincture and all that. I've got free online courses as well. Just pop them to my website and go into courses and you can see them on there. Oh, hang on. Oh, here we go. Somebody is on the chat. Anybody have any questions? No? I'm going to take that as a no. Well, if you do have any questions, you can always put them on Facebook or Instagram or anything, or you can just send me in an email and I will answer any questions that anybody has. But thank you to everyone for coming,